Well, needless to say, the story of the week is the idea that Minneapolis may defund or even abolish their police department, but that's pale. That's a pale solution compared to what's going on in crazy, nutty, out of this world San Francisco. Those lunatics out in California and San Francisco have devised the most crazy, ridiculous, insane idea that I have ever heard of. And here it is coming to you from PBS NewsHour Weekend. And here's the headline: San Francisco may stop hiring cops with records of misconduct. What are they thinking? Wow, what an incredible breakthrough. You know, I have to tell you, folks, it's not often that I'm gobsmacked by an article, but this one I was. I have to tell you, I'm truly, truly gobsmacked by it. And the reason I'm gobsmacked by it is the idea that a police force would hire police officers who have previous violations. It just simply seemed impossible to me. It really did. Here's a little quote back and forth talking with one of the city commissioners, Shaman Walton. He says, "We know there are officers who definitely have misconduct cases in cases of excessive force that are currently on our police force, period." Let me interrupt the interview at this point. We know that there are officers who definitely have misconduct cases and cases of excessive force that are currently on our police force. This is the San Francisco City Commissioner speaking. So my first question is not going to be this entire interview. My first question would be, Steve, let me just ask you, why are there officers who have definitely had misconduct cases and cases of excessive force currently on the San Francisco Police Department?
In 2 words, police unions.
Okay.
There you go. Those are your 2 words. It would definitely take local legislation, city ordinance, whatever, to prevent the unions from doing this. There's actually a lot to go over here. San Francisco's major problem isn't policing. I'm sure they've got bad apples just like every other police department does, and they need to get rid of them and not hire any more like them. But let me give you a story. I lived in San Francisco for a couple of years in the early 90s, and I lived in the Tenderloin, which is it is San Francisco's second worst neighborhood. I tell people who know the city that I used to live on the 900 block of Geary Street, and they go, "Oh, you used to live on the 900 block of Geary Street? Oh my God." You know, as a kid, I was 23, 24 years old. Rent was cheap. I was having a blast. My little block of the Tenderloin, every Friday and Saturday night was a almost literal parade of hookers and drug dealers. It was an epic, awesome show to see on the weekends. Yeah, just go for a little walk, and you go up half a block and make a right turn onto Polk Street. And I called it Magic Corner because when you turned onto Polk Street on Magic Corner, all the girl prostitutes magically became boys. It was, as I said, you had just endless variety. It was a treat for all of the senses. Well, except the nose sense. That wasn't always something you wanted to do. But let me tell you, the rent was cheap. It's why I lived there. I was saving my money, and I had a nice apartment. It was nice for a studio. It had a separate kitchen. There was a walk-through closet on the way to the bathroom, and it was only $400 a month. It was a deal. Well, out of curiosity, a couple of years ago, I looked up what apartments on that terrible 900 block of Geary are going for these days, and it's about $3,000 a month. $3,000. This is way, way, way above inflation since I left there in 1994. So you would think with all of this money coming into the city that they might be able to make the Tenderloin a little nicer, clean up the prostitutes and the drug dealers and all the rest. Except no, you still have all the streetwalkers, you still have all the drug dealers, but now you have sidewalks that are also covered in human excrement and used hypodermic needles. So all of this huge influx of money coming into San Francisco, and the city has actually degraded. So I don't think the problem is necessarily policing. That said, if we do 2 things, just 2 things, I think we can clean up police departments around this country. But the libertarian side says there's 3 things. And the third thing is you start repealing a crap ton of laws, and that'd be great. But my conservative side says if we get rid of immunity for police, and if we get rid of police unions, then number one, the police are liable for their illegal actions. And number two, they won't have a union keeping them in their jobs no matter what. Those two things, you clean it up. That said, I would like to applaud San Francisco for doing this. It's not often that city does anything right when it comes to government, and this is a great move. My only question is, are they going to grandfather in the existing abusive police officers? Because I don't think this is the time. I don't think San Francisco can afford to get rid of Dirty Harry right now.
Scott, in this very same paragraph, the one I just read you, here's the next sentence. We do know that the police officer that killed George Floyd had over a dozen complaints of excessive force and had had a couple of shootings that resulted in death. A dozen complaints of excessive force is 10 complaints more than I would have allowed. I might be willing to give the guy one chance if it was relatively minor and he understood it and so on. But really, I don't even know if I give him the first chance. Excessive force is excessive force. A dozen complaints of excessive force, apparently, for the police officer that killed George Floyd. And so while everybody is talking about defunding police departments, why don't we do something nutty like find any police officers that have already had a history of using excessive force and fire them before they get to use excessive force again? They're obviously in the wrong line of work.
I do want to make a quick distinction between complaints of excessive force and things that were adjudicated and investigated and found to be actual uses of excessive force. And I don't know the answer in that situation. But in any case, I'm sure there are many officers across the country, as you've indicated in San Francisco, who've had those kind of situations. You know, a lot of people think that the force of being a police officer lies in that thing that's hanging off his hip belt, that it's the gun that really brings the force of law to bear in the community. But that's not it. It's his rectitude. It's his righteousness. It's his role as a man of the law that really brings his influence, his credibility, his ability to bring peace in a community, for example, is, police officers rarely draw and fire their weapons in the line of duty. It's not a very frequent thing. And anytime it happens, then you're off the beat for a while. There's an investigation and all that goes on. So, it's not like TV shows where every episode the cop's pulling his gun and shooting at somebody. The real force of law and the effectiveness of police in the community comes from their relationships with the people in those communities, the willingness of the good people to essentially feed them information about what's going on with the bad people, and their ability to be trusted as a righteous vessel of the law, for want of a better term. Once you sacrifice that by beating up on somebody who's a perp, by violating the law yourself, then you've sacrificed everything. You might as well turn in the badge and the gun, because you are no longer a man of the law. You can't protect and serve if you yourself don't obey the laws under which you do so.
When I was a kid, and I first came to Florida from Bermuda, I joined Little League on Key Biscayne. And the first day we had 6 teams. Everybody had a color. They gave you a T-shirt and a hat. And the first day I was assigned to Scarlet Red. Scarlet Red was coached by a young guy whose name I'm not going to mention, but he was a young guy. He was probably in his mid to late 20s. And he was one of these guys where if you made a mistake, you're going to run to the church and back again. Give me 15 laps. One of these guys. At the end of the first day of practice, he had us practice sliding into home plate. And the way he did this, my first day on Scarlet, and the way he did this was he would have you start off on third base and have you run towards home plate, and then he would swing a baseball bat. And if you didn't get underneath the bat, then you probably learned your lesson about sliding. So I left that team after a day, and I went to Maroon and was coached by a great guy who bought us Slurpees, and even if we lost. Turns out that guy went on to be a Miami-Dade police officer, and he was listed as one of the 10 deadliest cops in Miami-Dade, something like 7 out of 10 years. Wow. I could have told you that was coming. That guy was a sadist and a lunatic. And he must have done enough damage to his fellow officers' reputation to have accounted for a serious number of shootings of policemen and assaults, and then people getting shot for resisting policemen because guys like this were on the force. I've heard it said that the huge majority of malpractice cases that every doctor has to pay astronomical premiums for in terms of their insurance are caused by a handful of doctors. A ridiculously small number of doctors are responsible for the vast majority of malpractice cases. Why don't you get them out of there? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But certainly in an era where police brutality is now the hot button issue, the idea that a person who is a city commissioner for San Francisco would admit that we already have a number of policemen who have reputations for excessive force and brutality. And Scott's right. I want to be clear about this. A complaint or an accusation is one thing. I'm talking about something that's been reviewed by the police department and found to be true. It's inconceivable to me. So here's the answer, folks. If it turns out that you've got a small but noticeable number of bad cops on your force, I'm assuming that you're hiring a guy who's already had a record of excessive force. I'm assuming you're hiring that guy because you are out of candidates. I don't imagine he would be your first pick. I imagine he'd be the last pick because you have to have so many police officers, and that's all there is to it. If you want to get rid of police brutality, you have to get rid of the very few bad cops that are known for excessive violence. And if you're going to get rid of them, that means you're going to be short a few people. And if you're going to be short a few people, that means in order to get the police force up to the level you want to, you're going to have to raise the salary of policemen so that better people will be attracted to the job. You have to raise the salary of policemen and increase funding to the police force so that they no longer have to accept these guys who have a reputation for police brutality, and you get better officers in there. And raising the and increasing the funding of police forces is the answer that's being sought all across the country. In other words, every single one of these things that people are talking about doing, like the mayor of Los Angeles saying he's pulling $150 million, $200 million away from the police force and giving it to the black community, just means that that's $200 million that could have gone to hire better guys and fire the guys who already are indications that they're already part of the problem and are very likely to be the people that start the next tinderbox that causes this city that I live in to blow up again. Sometimes things are so simple and so obvious, it makes you really wonder if you're really living in the actual real world. But folks, it's pretty simple. Increase the funding for your police forces. Get rid of the problem officers. Hire better people. And this problem will go away pretty much completely. I don't know what else to say about it other than to say this message has been brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com who make messages like this possible. We really could use your help. A small number of people pay for large numbers of people to see these things. And if you want to be a citizen producer and join the team, we would love to have you. I'm Bill Whittle for Steve Green and Scott Ott. We'll see you next week right here on Right Angle.